last night, Hillary Clinton went on MSNBC and told us that people who spread Russian misinformation should be jailed. Well, that's kind of ironic because the person who spread the most destructive Russian disinformation in history is Hillary Clinton. She pulled off the dirtiest trick in American political history, maybe in American history altogether, with the Russia collusion hoax. And she enlisted the intelligence agencies in doing so. And then, of course, that same game plan leading on from what she had done was used in 2019 with the Ukraine impeachment. And then it was used again with the Hunter laptop in 2020. And all of that has seeded all this anti-Russian sentiment all across the country. And of course, it led not only to divisions domestically, but it led to the whole mess we see worldwide now with the Ukraine war and so on. So before we dive into all those issues, let's have a look at exactly what she said.
A lot of Russians who were engaged in direct election interference and boosting Trump back in 2016. But I also think there are Americans who are engaged in this kind of propaganda. And whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrent.
Yeah, I mean, everybody saw those videos yesterday, and she's going on Rachel Maddow, and first of all, she's going on right after the second assassination attempt on Trump, and calling him dangerous. But she's also just the sheer hypocrisy of what she's saying. Of all the people to deliver the message that was delivered, to have it be Hillary Clinton, as you were alluding to in the open, if this is a woman who invented the Russia collusion hoax, which has propagated. If anything, it's one of those things that has 9 lives and keeps going. And it didn't just, it led to a division within our country, but it also led to a structural way in which our country conducts foreign policy. And that continues to today. And if anything, it's maybe worse than it ever was. It may have been one of the primary contributory factors to the Ukraine war. So that narrative is still propagating in real time now. And to have to listen to her put that forth, what the interesting thing is, what Hillary Clinton was really doing yesterday, and this is sort of a characteristic of the left, her level of hypocrisy was so great that in a rational world, she was quite literally making the case that she should be the one who is jailed.
Well, exactly right. She said that spreading Russian misinformation should be an offense, should be a criminal offense. She said civil and criminal, as we just saw there. So who exactly did that? Well, first of all, in spreading misinformation, disinformation, whatever you want to call it, she is the #1 perpetrator in the entire country. She pulled off the biggest hoax, the biggest disinformation hoax in political history. There's no doubt about that in terms of the Russia collusion hoax. And let's just put a finer point on that, because it is so important. As you say, we've been just inundated with this crap for 8 years. We sometimes kind of lose sight of what actually happened, just in a nutshell, in a sentence. Hillary Clinton, cast the Republican presidential candidate, as well as the then future president of the United States, as a Russian agent. That's it. Full stop. That is what she did. That is beyond dirty. That is just unimaginably terrible what she did there. And she, of course, it was all made up, and she recruited the intelligence agencies to help her in that endeavor. And we can get into that here in a moment in terms of what exactly happened there. We can go through the whole timeline and how this whole thing was recycled, as we mentioned in the open, again with Ukraine, with Hunter laptop and so on. But I think just to start off with, it's really worth recalling what happened right at the initial stage, at the origination stage. She came up with a hoax. The Republican nominee for president is a Russian agent. That was the story. And we know this. We know this for a fact. I mean, we kind of thought we knew it for many years early on. And then in 2020, we found out as a fact that is what happened. This is even after Steele and after Hillary's funding of Steele and all this stuff came out. In 2020, we found out that her plan had been uncovered by the same intelligence agencies who would then later go and help her to advance her plan. So they basically co-opted her plan. We can get into that here in a moment, but at the origination stage, it was her idea, and the intelligence agencies caught wind of that. And John Brennan, who was in charge of the CIA back then, this is 2016, he did a CYA. So he knew, okay, we know about Hillary Clinton's plan to vilify Trump as the Russian agent. What are we going to do with this? Are we going to hide it? Well, yeah, of course we're going to hide it. And of course we're going to join her and help her. But this is a CYA part. This is how we eventually found out about it. He took that information, and we have it. We have it in writing. It was uncovered in 2020 by, I think it was John Ratcliffe, the DNI back then. So 4 years too late. But anyway, he took that piece of paper that said that Hillary Clinton had a plan to vilify Donald Trump as a Russian agent. He took that to President Obama in July of 2016. And that was purely CYA. Like, well, you know, I said. And then, of course, all these people just circled the wagons for Hillary. Everyone kept quiet. No one, the country was torn apart. Trump was, his associates were jailed. Trump was dragged in front of the special prosecutor, and on and on and on. All this stuff was going on. And all the while, they knew, they had the evidence, we have it in writing, that Hillary was behind it all. And, you know, to me, again, I know I spent a few minutes here on this now, but it is so important to just revisit that, just because it just proves how incredibly nefarious this whole thing was on her part.
Well, I mean, the way that I look at it is I see this as sort of emblematic to the establishment's response to Trump. And by the establishment, I kind of mean everybody. Because, you know, as you mentioned, the Clinton plan becomes public in late July, about 5 days before the FBI opens up Crossfire Hurricane. John Brennan walks into Obama's office, shows it to Obama, shows it to Comey. They're both present at that meeting. And there's two things that, well, there's really three things that happen as a result of that. But first of all, rather than you'd think that in a rational world, you're presented with a plan that Hillary Clinton has a plan to tar her political opponent with false allegations of Russia collusion. Well, maybe you would think about investigating the Hillary Clinton campaign. But rather than doing that, what was immediately opened up was an investigation into the Trump campaign. And everything that they did from that moment on was done to further the Clinton plan. So I've always maintained that, you know, the Clinton plan, that Obama and Brennan and really the intelligence community at all, everybody became brought in and helped to further the Clinton plan. The Clinton plan became the establishment plan in my mind. There's two other things that happened that same day. Is right out of that is we had the John Brennan's task force. He was given permission by Obama to establish that. And that's where he brought together this unprecedented grouping of the CIA and the FBI. Really, it was just handpicked guys like Strozak, et cetera, a few small groups of people that began working. That ultimately led to the creation of the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment. But also it was sort of an overarching blessing of Obama that Obama was on board. You know, it's worth remembering that, just less than a month later, John Brennan was in front of the Gang of Eight. CIA director is now sitting down individually, which each member of the congressional Gang of Eight, and briefing them, not on the Clinton plan, but briefing them on Russian collusion allegations and briefing them on the Steele dossier. And we know this factually because Harry Reid, who was given his own briefing, separate from everybody else, and apparently different briefings amongst the senators and the members of Gang of Eight, not just senators, and that briefing that Harry Reid received, he then sent 2 letters to Comey. He's basically trying to publicly out, the information. He's trying to force Comey to disclose the Steele dossier. How? Because Harry Reid knows about it. So on every level, this thing became so immediately bought into and polluted. It's even now I'm getting extremely angry all over again, just thinking back to something that I know intimately.
I get it. I get just listening to you there. I get angry all over again about Obama, who's kind of managed to escape all scrutiny in respect of what happened here. And of course, his role was not only July 28th, receiving that information, but later on when he concocted the idea of having an intelligence community assessment that was pre-designed to claim that Putin elected Trump. and to have that out before Trump became president so that his entire presidency would be sabotaged by that. He'd have it basically hanging around his neck the whole time. But when you mentioned Obama there, it just all came back to me again. This guy, Obama, the president at the time, with all the not only duties but also responsibilities of office, especially the Constitution and upholding it and so on, is told July 28th. Now, it's possible that he knew before. Maybe the CYA July 28th was simply CYA that, someone stumbled upon this, so what are we going to do? But we knew all along. I don't know that. So I don't know whether Obama knew before July 28th, 2016 or not. I don't know if Brennan knew. I guess Brennan might have known. Anyway, we don't know that, but we do know for a fact, 100%, again, we have it in writing, that as of July 28th, 2016, President Obama knew that the Russia hoax is a Hillary Clinton dirty trick. It couldn't be clearer. It's right there. And he then let the country be torn apart in his remaining 5-6 months in office. And in fact, he poured gas on the fire, a lot of gas throughout this time. And that just makes me so incredibly angry that he did that he hasn't been held to account, and maybe worst of all, that he hasn't even been asked about it, and no one even talks about it.
He really unleashed the dogs on January 5th, January 6th, and those meetings, the one where Susan Rice, memorialized things to sort of protect herself. That was and we're talking about the beginning of 2017. We're talking just 15 days before Trump steps into office officially. And, that was the go-ahead to the intelligence community to go after Trump, who now had a shocking win. But, going back to your question about when this began, I guess I have a theory about that. And that is, there was a lot of hints coming out from little tidbits, little emails from the Clinton campaign that this, this plan had already been put into place, and it appears to originate with Jake Sullivan. And what I think happened is that they were fully aware of everything that was going on, but there was a channel, a cable that came into the CIA. I still haven't determined who that person is, but received a cable, and it appears that he turned it around maybe same day to John Brennan, if not the very next morning. So very, very quickly, where they realized that it seemed that the Russians had received information that Hillary had this plan. And I think that was the notification. I think they already knew before that about the Clinton plan, but now they were suddenly worried that this could somehow become public. So, I don't have any proof of that, but that's personally my take, kind of putting pieces together over time. But, like you say, what Obama did was just unbelievable. And it couldn't have happened without Obama. Something like this had to have presidential blessing, and it was given. And then once it was given, it spread like wildfire, and it came in from every different angle. And it really became, totally unleashed in the beginning of 2017, and then haunted Trump's presidency to the point that it wasn't clear that he was going to be able to complete his first term. First half of 2017, it was starting to look like the odds were pretty good that Trump was actually going to be out of office, going to be pushed out, be impeached, whatever. And indeed, he still was impeached, even though he wasn't convicted. It's still with us today, and it's resurfaced. We've talked in past shows about how this whole, we kind of thought the Russia collusion nonsense was kind of dead. Like, how could they possibly bring this dead horse back? And they have. And now here we are.
You're absolutely right. And it's the gift that keeps on giving for them. And even though it's been completely, again, as you said, it's not only being completely disproven. Everything, like the entire dossier was made up. The whole thing was just made up. But we know who initiated it. We have proof of that too. So it goes beyond just disproving something. We can also prove that it was a hoax that was organized, orchestrated by the other side. So it's all there. All the evidence is there. And yet, for very strange reasons that have to do with Democrats controlling the government, the media, and so on, and various other reasons, it's still there. I mean, I think actually the main reason is that it's become so deeply entrenched. This whole idea of Russia is bad is just, it's so difficult to overcome that now, because obviously that already, they chose a good hoax, if I may say so, because of course this idea Russia bad has already been around, Cold War and so on. So that the roots of that were already there. You just needed to revive it, and they did a good job at that because. Generally speaking, I mean, Russia has suffered tremendously in terms of its image. And I'm not talking post-2022 Ukraine war and so on. I'm talking that period, the 2016 period when Trump was the one saying, hey, it's no good making enemies everywhere. Why don't we try and talk to these people, Russia? And, the establishment did not like that. And, of course, they fully went ahead with the Russia collusion hoax. And again, so I'm talking about 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, and so on. Russia is the pariah. This is pre-Ukraine. And what for, right? What for? And what's the fallout? And this is where I think it's sort of doubly nefarious, the whole thing we're talking about now, because it's not just that they sabotaged Trump's first term, which they did. And by the way, if I can just digress here for a moment, I always felt that Trump deserves a second term, but not for any of the reasons that you typically hear. Oh, he's finally going to, clean up with the deep state and this and that and the other. No. I always felt he deserves another one simply because they stole his first one. That's it. That's always been my thinking on this. So sorry for the digression here, but that's where we are now, that this hoax, the Russia collusion hoax, which vilified Russia in the minds of hundreds of millions of people, probably hundreds of millions of Americans, at least tens of millions. Russia is the pariah. Trump is bad. He must have something to do with Russia. Anything to do with Russia is bad. It's just like this one word and boom, and that they're still using that today with great effect, and that it has caused so much just havoc around the world. Ukraine war, but not just that. I mean, the kind of the marriage of China and Russia on a geopolitical scale, that is going to haunt us for long after we're both dead. That's still going to be a huge problem, way, in the future. And that originated with the Russia collusion hoax. I think that hasn't really sunk in with many people yet.
It's sort of hypocrisy upon hypocrisy upon hypocrisy. You hear the term Teflon Don or Slick Willie for Clinton, but is there any president that's more Teflon, more impervious than Obama? I have a hard time coming up with one in terms of that he just seems to escape all criticism, all blame. And he deserves, the fact that he hasn't been asked questions is literally unbelievable to me. I mean, my own opinion is that the whole Russia collusion hoax narrative may have actually originated with the desire to cover up everything that Biden was doing in Ukraine and Obama's knowledge of that. But that's a whole probably separate show. But remember, it was Obama who, debating Mitt Romney, and famously said, when Mitt Romney was talking about the dangers of Russia, and Obama said that the Yetis called and they want their foreign policy back, meaning that Russia wasn't a threat from Obama's perspective. The times had changed, and Russia was, kind of a friendly country almost. And that was Obama saying this. And then we all remember Obama at the end of his first term, and he got caught on that hot mic with was it the ambassador to Russia? Well, it doesn't matter. High-ranking guy in Russia. He's meeting with him. And on that hot mic, he says, if you can just, deliver a message to Vladimir Putin that I'll have more flexibility, once I get past this and enter my second part of my term. On a hot mic. And that just kind of...
Medvedev, he was president at the time. They did the swap around because Putin couldn't have more than 2 terms in a row. And now they swap back. So now Medvedev is the prime minister again. By the way, he's got a very active Twitter account, Dmitry Medvedev. So, no, you're right. But for that reason, I think that this idea that Russia is this pariah was recycled. I don't think that was always the idea among the Obama people, like starting 2008 and 2009, that we're going to make Russia this giant pariah. I think initially they probably did want to talk to them, see what can be done and so on. And of course, Hillary's reset totally messed it up when she, brought the reset button. And of course, they didn't even get the word reset right, which is hugely embarrassing. And they went ahead and did a bunch of things that obviously Russia couldn't have been happy about, like all these interventions, I remember Libya, Syria, and so on. So, things
They
kind of
started taking a number of actions that went against Russia, but it also coalesced against the backdrop of what they began to do in Ukraine and the Maidan
and I think that's the
Revolution.
key point. You're
And
absolutely right.
that's where
Because
things really turned. And suddenly that narrative fit very conveniently with what they wanted to do geopolitically.
100%. So again, I don't think that Russia bad was always the Obama's kind of the Obama strategy here. But yeah, there was a sort of a bit by bit things started kind of going bad as we just described. But then Ukraine was the pivotal point.
Yeah.
And how did that happen? Well, that's deep state. I mean, in many ways, well, that's neocons and deep state. So what happened in Ukraine is that the country, well, historically, the country is split into East and West. And the East speaks Russian and the West speaks Ukrainian. So just as a starting point, you have a country that speaks two different languages, which is kind of problematic to begin with. And then you have a big river cutting right through the country, the Dnieper. So that, of course, is a kind of a natural impediment that has created this historically. And it's always a balancing act when you're the leader of Ukraine. How do you deal with this, right? And in 2013, the then leader of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, he was, they say, oh, he's pro-Russian. You cannot be pro. He was the democratically elected leader of Ukraine. He was not pro-Russian. He had a difficult job because he had a country that's basically split in two. And he was negotiating with the EU about a free trade agreement on that side, and he was also negotiating with one on the other side, on the east, with Russia. And you can't have both. And the EU said you can't have both, because if you have free trade with the EU, but you also have it with Russia, then all this Russian stuff can come flooding into the EU, and the EU would never allow that. So the EU told them you got to have one or the other. And after a lot of back and forth, and I think Russia promised them something like 15 billion in loans and whatever, things like that, they decided, okay, we're going to have a free trade agreement with Russia, and we're going to put the EU one on hold. And that was taken as a sort of trigger to overthrow this guy, Yanukovych, a democratically elected government. And the people who overthrew him, of course, most of all were Victoria Nuland, Pyatt, the U.S. ambassador over there. You had John McCain, who was constantly over there. You had Lindsey Graham. All the usual suspects were involved with that.
Well, and Joe Biden, he was brought in as the linchpin.
Of course, you're right. Well, Joe Biden greenlighted it all, as we know from the leaked Nuland tape. And I completely agree with you. That was really the start of the Ukraine war, but that was also the start of the whole, we need to make Russia the pariah. That started in 2014 for sure, yeah.
Yeah, that was the realignment, and it carried over. Suddenly it became convenient. And more than convenient, it became conducive to what they were trying to do. But as
and
we
then
said,
in 2015, like barely a year later, Trump shows up. June of 2015, when he announced, and first thing he says is we need to become more friendly with Russia. This is no good. They have the most nuclear weapons of anyone in the whole world by far. They are far more aligned with us sort of culturally and historically, religiously, in all these different ways than they are, for instance, with China. There's no reason we shouldn't be. We don't have to be friends, but there's no reason not to, there's no reason to be enemies. So let's try that. And that didn't work because, of course, they'd already, by they, I mean, sort of Obama, deep state, Nuland, the whole cabal had already set out on the exact opposite course.
Yeah, and, we started off talking about Hillary, and you mentioned somewhere along these ways, Libya, Syria, et cetera. And, I guess that's maybe worth acknowledging as well, because the hand that Hillary Clinton had in that, in terms of taking out Gaddafi and sort of opening up the floodgates of the migration issues that then, absolutely overwhelmed Europe and are now plaguing ourselves, that really kind of traces back to taking out Gaddafi in Libya and how it spread in the war throughout the Middle East, Syria, which was just utterly destroyed. All of that traces back to that period as well.
Yeah, so, destabilized Egypt, ruined Syria. I mean, it's these guys. By these guys, I mean Hillary as Secretary of State, Obama. That whole period of time, they caused so much trouble, and of course, it really culminated in 2014. I mean, overthrowing the democratically elected government. It's not even a dictatorship or whatever. It's a democratically elected president, and they overthrew that. And then, as you say, the whole Biden thing comes in. Not only did he greenlight it, but his son, a few weeks after Biden did that, his son shows up and starts collecting protection money from the people in Ukraine. As we've discussed on previous shows, as they kept doing every time Biden showed up somewhere, Romania, China, whatever, Hunter was, a few weeks after Hunter was there. But that's sort of the personal grift, which when we've discussed that a lot. But I mean, the far bigger problem in terms of the world is the geopolitical shift and just the chaos that these people created. But they're still doing it, and I think the Hillary going on MSNBC last night really drives home this point that not only have they not learned anything, well, it's just it's all made up, it's all fabricated, it's all a lie. She's just just being a hypocrite. Hypocrite is not even a good word. We need a much stronger word for what she is. She's a crook. But the fact that she's still doing that, and the fact that at least all the media, half the country, and so on is applauding it, means that the message simply hasn't gotten through. Because anyone who looks at this objectively, coming back to our initial point here, what she said, that Russian disinformation, people should be jailed and so on. Anyone who looks at this objectively would have to conclude that she's the one that needs to be jailed for spreading Russian disinformation.
And that really brings us, though, to a larger point in all this. And that's kind of twofold in terms of it's kind of the ends justify the means, and the ends are power and control. And what Hillary Clinton did, she was both calling for, it was effectively another round of assassination prep for Trump, demonizing him in that same bit with Rachel Maddow, which, by the way, is, of course, she picks Rachel Maddow, the absolute purveyor of the Russia collusion nonsense. But it's further prep, assassination prep for Trump, but it's also just the level of hypocrisy and the accusations to the other side of the very things you do. And it's that hypocrisy that's both so infuriating, but it's also kind of the defining aspect of the left, is that everything they do is of a hypocritical nature, of accusing others of the things that they're doing, but that's not by accident, that's by intent. They don't care. There's no concern that they're being hypocritical. They're not worried about that. They're worried about the end game. So they just say and do whatever they feel they need to do in order to gain power. And that's what last night was about.
And it's been so successful. I mean, who can blame them? Because the media is applauding them instead of investigating and reporting on what we just talked about. But they keep recycling this whole story over and over, and they are so incredibly successful. They, as we said, they sabotaged Trump with the Russia collusion hoax. They criminalized diplomacy with Russia. Trump never had a chance of ever getting anywhere. And I don't even blame him or his, lack of self-control and so on, which, he does lack self-control, but that wasn't the problem. He tried, and it just, like, you remember when he met Putin in Helsinki in 2018, and the media said, "Oh my God, Putin gave him a soccer ball, and the soccer ball had a transmitting device." That's that's all just this absolute craziness, right? He was just never able to do anything as far as Russia is concerned. Trump wasn't in his entire 4 years, never able to do anything constructive, because immediately, you remember when Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, came to visit in the White House, which is a completely normal thing, and there's ambassadors there every day from all kinds of different countries. It's just a thing that happens. And then the media completely lost it. So anytime anything with Russia happened, he wasn't able to operate. He wasn't able to do anything. So criminalized diplomacy with Russia. You had the Mueller, you had all these kinds of things. But then, of course, they used the same hoax with Ukraine in 2019. And then Trump got impeached over it. And then in 2020, there wouldn't even be a President Biden hadn't it been for the 2020 Russia hoax, which is that Russia somehow fabricated Hunter's laptop, which, everyone in government knew to be a lie. And yet, we've talked about this on previous shows, they've just left it out there. And that easily cost Trump the election. And then, of course, now we have it recycled again. The Russia collusion, what is it now, 3.0? We talked about this on previous shows. They're digging up Danchenko again, the Steele guy. I mean, it's the same things over and over. And now kind of Hillary shows up. And yeah, you're right. It's kind of hypocrisy. It's what they always do. It's projection. It's all those things. But to me, seeing Hillary last night was was kind of the worst of them all. It's like, that's why I said earlier, the word hypocrisy isn't good enough. The word projection isn't good enough. None of it. This is sort of the height of nefariousness. It's just evil. It's just pure evil.
It is, but it's also very, very strategic. Her appearance last night was not by accident. And, you mentioned the fact of Russia, 3.0 now. And to me, what happens is it's our elections. Our elections and all the fervor and all the emotion that they conjure up, it's what creates the construct that makes it so easy to give the Russia collusion narrative new life. Because we've become so opposed. I feel like our nation right now is a powder keg. And people on both sides are looking for anything to kind of bolster their narrative. So for the left, you have this absolute willingness to embrace anything that helps you. And of course, the DOJ comes out and conveniently finds a couple podcasters who were unknowingly paid by Russia. Boom, Russian narrative alive again. And there's no critical thinking that's applied. Hillary Clinton's appearance last night, like, let's say if you could sort of mentally deconstruct things and put Trump in her place, and Trump was the one that had done everything that Hillary Clinton had done, and Trump went on last night and said what Hillary Clinton said, the media would have been feasting nonstop in terms of tearing that down, because everything Hillary Clinton said last night was so demonstrably false and so easy to disprove that's all we would have been seeing, for a week. Is just a deconstruction of everything that was said in a brief 3.5-minute appearance on Rachel Maddow. But of course, that's not the case. And, nobody is being objective or willing to look at the facts. The left is just eating this up willingly because, why? Because it enhances their chances in the election. So each time we move into a new election cycle, there is a readiness, a willingness to bite, to accept, to take in a Russia collusion narrative and just not look at it with any sort of objectivity or critical thinking. Just buy it because it assists you.
There's also a CYA angle here, which is, of course, that she went on Rachel Maddow's show exactly 24 hours after some guy tried to assassinate Trump on a golf course. And of course, that guy, Ryan Ruth, if you look at his social media history before they erased it all, that's another thing. Well, we should talk about that in another show one day. Yeah. Why did they just always? Who orders the? How can just everything just be deleted immediately? Like just on, like someone presses a button and suddenly the guy disappears from the internet. Luckily, some people caught some screenshots before that happened. So if you go through this guy's social media, this guy was a Russia collusion fanatic. He was a Ukraine fanatic. He was completely whipped up by all this hysteria about this anti-Russian sentiment that Hillary seeded. All these hoaxes, everything that pushed this guy forward. Now, without even getting into was he sent? What did he have helpers? All this, we don't know so much stuff about this. But the mere fact that he was inspired by, in some way, that his mind was completely messed with by this Russia collusion nonsense is, they need a CYA there. So they need to send Hillary out and say, well, but it's real, Russia, Trump.
Well, I mentioned assassination prep earlier in this, and that's a term that was coined originally by Molly Hemingway, and we've used it a lot because it's so accurate. And her going out, as you said, 24 hours later, we immediately shifted from assassinations are bad and we shouldn't have violence in America, but Trump did it. He brought it on himself. It's Trump's fault. That was the new and immediate narrative that we had this time around, is that it was effectively Trump's fault in that he calls for violence. And, that's what led to this. And that's what Hillary was really doing last night, demonizing both Trump and, talking about yet another immediate threat to, the First Amendment and the fact that people should be jailed for free speech, despite the fact that the person who's saying that is the one who should have been jailed. Again, that moves to another goal. She doesn't care about the hypocrisy of what she's saying. She cares about the goal of the move that she wants to make. So in many ways, what we saw with Hillary Clinton talking was multi-layered. In terms of goals of squashing free speech, in terms of blaming Trump, that Trump brought this upon himself, in terms of reinvoking the Russia collusion narrative, all these different things that were going on in that, that are all part of this election cycle. And it's something that it's very scary to see take place. And again, with no pushback from the media, acceptance, whatever. And this idea that Trump, it's Trump's fault. It's his speech that brought this on. Never mind that Trump has been the victim in this since the very day one. We already talked about that, 2015, when he first came on the scene, and the way that the machine kind of ramped up against him and then just absolutely hamstrung the first 2 years of his administration. So the idea that Trump might say a few mean things or send out a few mean tweets, yeah, he was utterly victimized. But there's never any look at the origination for that. There's only a look at the output. It's kind of like the ref in a football game. The old adage that the person who punches back is the guy that gets flagged. And that's kind of what's going on here, except they're using it for political means.
To close this out here, I think it's worth kind of just spending a moment thinking about how do we put a stop to this? It's been 8 years now of Russia collusion nonsense. And of course, collusion is now many other things. Seeding the Ukraine war, the IC being part of that we haven't really even talked about that today anyway. We talked about it previously, how Hillary co-opted the IC. When the Ukraine hoax happened in 2019, the IC was co-opted with that. It was the Inspector General of the IC who pushed that fake fraudulent impeachment. 2020,
although I would just halt you and say I'm not sure co-opted is the right word. The IC may have actually been driving that.
Yeah, very good point. And of course, in 2020, with the Hunter laptop hoax, it being a hoax that it was Russian disinformation, that was entirely driven by the IC. In fact, the letter was from 51 former intelligence officials, including 5 CIA directors.
And help of the current CIA director.
Correct. How do we, how do we put a stop to this? Well, getting rid of the IC or reforming it or whatever you want to say is, I wouldn't even know how to start with that. I mean, maybe to start off by not putting people like Mike Pompeo in charge of the CIA or Gina Haspel and so on. But it's such a monster at this point. And it's not just the CIA. I mean, it's so multifaceted that I don't even know how we would go about that. But one thing I do know is that in order to even start getting beyond the Russia nonsense, which is very, very important. It's very important for geopolitics. It's very important for the entire Trump legacy. It's very important for all the people who were wronged, Michael Flynn and Michael Caputo, and on and on and on, long, long list. We need to finally put an end to this Russia collusion nonsense. And I'm not saying that's going to fix the IC or whatever, but you got to start somewhere. And I think that's a really good starting point, because that has caused us like 8 years of nonstop problems, all made up by Hillary. And we've exposed everything. People like you, our friends, Walker Fire, Full Nelson, Steve McIntyre, so many people kind of pitched in to expose it all. We've exposed it. We've exposed every single facet of the Russia collusion hoax, every part of it, from Danchenko to Steele to this alpha nonsense. Everything has been exposed, but it hasn't gotten us very far. It doesn't seem to be enough to just expose the whole thing as a fraud. So I think what's left is that you have to actually go after the perpetrators. You have to hold people accountable, because that's the one thing that has not happened.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a twofold strategy there, because I agree with you that that's been a typifying effect of the entire Russia collusion affair, of everything over the last 8 years, is that anytime culpability is proven, nothing ever happens, ever. The only person that was actually charged in this, what's his face, the low-level lawyer, Kevin Kleinsmith, that guy gets off with a slap on the wrist and is back sitting happy and everything's absolutely fine, as if there was, never any problem. And so nobody is held accountable. But I also think there should, if I had my druthers, I would see the implementation of a massive government downsizing. And obviously that's very easy to say. But the reason that I say that is that the more chaos you can sow within the ranks of the bureaucracy, the better. That you try to go after some people and actually hold people accountable, and at the same time engage in as much possible downsizing as you can. Not only for the benefit that the downsizing brings to itself. I mean, I've argued for a long time that the single greatest amount of American wealth is currently tied up in the inefficiency of our bloated, corrupt government. If you want a quick way to extract, trillions of dollars, go after our own federal government and downsize it. but there's also the dissension and the kind of chaos that comes into the ranks from doing that. So if you could do those twin things to certain amounts of degree simultaneously, I would think that would be the most effective strategy. But there has to be some accountability. If you're on the left and you're engaging in these strategies, you have not experienced one single negative pushback that would have you not to keep engaging in this behavior. There's been no disincentives whatsoever.